Juan Williams, my old friend, I want to just say at the beginning here that my first job out of college, I was a researcher at Fox News Channel for Chris Wallace, where I had the opportunity to work with you on a weekly basis, prepping the Fox News Sunday panel.
And I am eternally grateful because in terms of that research, you made me a better, more informed journalist, and obviously your career, your life has gone on because you have the skill, Mo.
Well, I appreciate that, Juan. I should say I was very young, starting out. I think I was like still going out with friends till like 2 or 3 in the morning on a Saturday night. I got like an hour and a half, 2 hours of sleep. I'd have to wake up, very early. And this is still, I mean, the internet is still relatively young 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I would have to wait for the print editions of the Washington Post and the New York Times and Time Magazine, because still at that time, they weren't putting all the articles on the website.
No.
So living going through the print edition, I'm sitting there like with scissors and Scotch tape, pasting things for you and Britt and Mara and Chris Wallace early.
I remember.
Hung over on a Sunday morning. And I thought I got away with it, but there was an EP at the time, executive producer Marty Ryan, who at one point was like, dude, I smell the vodka on you.
I didn't know this story. Oh my gosh.
So anyway, it's a blast from the past here. So great to be chatting with you. Congrats on the new book.
Thanks, man.
So you wrote a book back in the late 80s called Eyes on the Prize, looking back at the first civil rights movement, a groundbreaking book. Now, 40 years later, you have written about what you believe is a new civil rights movement here. So the original book, Eyes on the Prize, this one, New Prize for These Eyes. What inspired you to now, nearly 40 years later, take a renewed look at the state of play in America?
Well, I don't know. You may smell vodka on me in a second after I explain. You may say, what is this guy talking about? That's what people are reluctant to really open up to, the idea that there's a second movement. They say, what are you talking about? But this book makes an important point, Mo, that in fact, we are in a second movement and it's having as much, if not more impact than the first movement. You think of the first movement and you think of its goals as things like passing the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The Great March on Washington was all about getting Congress to act on that legislation to certify that regardless of race, all Americans should have their rights protected by the federal government. Specifically, your right, to go to school, not ride in the back of the bus, swim in the pool, etc. Right? Okay, fast forward. That's what I'm going to ask you to do, Mo. Fast forward in your mind. And here we are. And after George Floyd was killed, Black Lives Matter had marches around the United States. In the first movement, the Great March on Washington, where King gives the I Have a Dream speech, it was a phenomenal success. 250,000 people, headlines. One march, 250,000 people. After George Floyd, thousands of marches across the United States. Thousands, with millions of people, more than 26 million people. And it went global. It wasn't just a U.S. movement. You could have been in Paris. You could have been in London. You could have been in Buenos Aires. And you would have seen that there were people marching under the Black Lives banner. This is a tremendous, and I will make this point, given that I'm speaking to you shortly after Donald Trump's second inaugural address. I'll make this point to you that 66+% of white Americans supported the Black Lives Matter marches. And it was like 70% of Hispanics and Asians, 80% of Blacks. The power is just incredible. Again, going back to the first movement, people now laud Dr. King, but they forget how unpopular. And people saw Dr. King at that time not only as a provocateur, a northern agitator, a problem. They were so afraid of that Great March on Washington that they constrained it to one day. They had the buses come in the morning, leave in the evening. They were fearful.
The effort by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI to surveil King because of the abject fear they had that he was fomenting a civil war. right?
Correct. And so I think people now, again, in sort of nostalgic mimes of memory, they think, oh, well, he was a wonderful guy. We've got a statue. Look, there was more fear of him then than there has been, as I say, of what is a very popular, not as popular now as we speak, but was at the moment after George Floyd, an extremely popular unifying movement. And let me just continue on this theme for a second, because as you were talking about what you used to do on Sunday mornings, cutting up newspapers and magazines because it wasn't all available on the internet. The reality of this second movement, I think, is sometimes hidden to people who don't understand that this is a 24/7 movement. You can't wait for the morning paper. It's on the internet. It's internet memes and viral images and messages that are flowing in terms of different websites. And people are talking constantly about what it means to be a minority, a woman, an immigrant in America in the 21st century. And the lived experience is what's driving this. And it's why, $90+ million flowed into Black Lives Matter initially. This is an internet movement, and it continues to impact our culture, questions about cultural representation of race, questions about hiring and about admissions to colleges. That's reflected in the current loud argument about diversity, equity, and inclusion as President Trump tries to undo it. And of course, given that I'm talking about Black Lives Matter, it's arguments about how police interact with racial minorities. Oftentimes, it's sadly brutal.
It seemed to be a core mission here. I mean, you laid out the distinctions there between the 60s civil rights movement. We're talking about voting rights and basic equality and some of those tenets there. Obviously, that would evolve towards the end of MLK's life, towards other things he was looking at, right. Overall poverty, etc. As far as this movement is concerned, I mean, you laid out the George Floyd situation. I think that's why it had resonance globally, is because the relationship that minorities have in a variety of countries around the world with law enforcement is strained. Would you say that was a core goal here of the movement? I mean, what other items, as you kind of tick off here, the second civil rights movement, what are the kind of core tenets of what the goals were beyond the kind of social justice law enforcement element here?
Well, you can't get away from the law enforcement focus. I think, remember, Black Lives Matter starts with the murder of Trayvon Martin. Martin is a kid walking home from a corner store with candy, Skittles, and an iced tea. And then but he's dressed in a hoodie, and, he's like your typical 17-year-old. He's got his pants hanging down and he's on the phone with his girlfriend. And this volunteer security guard sees him, thinks he's suspicious looking, threatening black male, and then they're engaged. The guard has a gun. He does not. Trayvon Martin is shot and killed. The police don't even arrest the security guard. They think, just some dispute, some misunderstanding. It's only after pressure from the parents and lawyers that the police arrest him, prosecution takes place. But when he is acquitted, there are people, and goes back to the internet thing I was talking to you about. He's killed in Florida. There are women in Oakland, California, who, despairing at the verdict, decide, this is crazy. You can talk about, black kids wearing hoodies and why was he walking in the rain and all this kind of stuff. But the argument was very simple and to this day resonant. Black Lives Matter. This child's life mattered. And that's what starts this movement. So we can't get away from the focus on trying to correct the relationship between police and black people, usually young black males. I would, just remind you and the audience listening of names like Eric Garner in New York, who died, a chokehold, selling loose cigarettes in New York. Of course, Michael Brown, who died shot by cops on a street in Ferguson, Missouri. It was after that shooting, by the way, Mo, that Black Lives Matter really for the first time went to the scene. And when they went to the scene, they were like, we're going to lead marches, but we're not going to organize. We're not going to take charge here. of other cities and other places. Every city can have their own chapter. And there was like a diffuse leadership, and they refused. They made a case for it. They said, we don't want to be a hierarchical, patriarchal leadership. We think that everybody should be making decisions for themselves, again, in line with the internet, right? And everybody can have their own say. And as a result, again, people ask me, they say, hey, where is the Dr. King of this movement? I say, there isn't, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza. These people have absolutely said they don't want to be leaders, and they don't want it to be male leadership for sure.
Right. We became accustomed for years with the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharptons of the world.
Exactly. But this is different. And, Jackson's still alive, Sharpton still a voice, but it's in a different mode. And now the current mode for Black Lives Matter is really one of young people who not only disdain formal leadership of their own movement, but disdain politics. They oftentimes think politicians are self-serving. And, I'm going to jump ahead, and I fear I'm unsettling your interview, Mo, but, people ask me, why do you think like a quarter of young Black people and half of Latino young men voted for Donald Trump? And I think a lot of them are just turned off by politics, the establishment, the status quo. And they're saying, hey, okay, so Trump is a disruptor. He's chaotic. He may even have some racist instincts and past history, but I'll just take anything different. I'll just try anything. I'll just go with, Mr. Loudmouth, the women, the money. He's like a gangster, hip hop star or something, right? So they're attracted to this.
Well, I would throw in there the argument that there's been overreach, that the dispersed leadership, and this is an argument that one can make, right? The fact that they haven't gone with a leader has meant you have all these BLM chapters.
Yes.
Some have been talking about things like defund the police and stuff that is triggering to, you mentioned some of those numbers earlier, Juan, right? 70% of people supported BLM, at least in the beginning, right?
Right.
I imagine those numbers are not the same today.
No, it's still about 50% though.
Yes. But is there an argument to be made that the movement itself over the course of the past few years, there have been controversies with colors and how the tens of millions that went into BLM was misused,
right?
And
corruption
internally,
people lining their friends' pockets and all that.
And so what's your assessment of where BLM and the overall the second civil rights movement stands in 2025, and what errors were potentially made here over the course of the past few years that lead to a new generation of, I should say, young Latino and Black men, especially, that are, know nothing else in our politics, but, Donald Trump came on the scene when some of these kids were in middle school, were in elementary school. They know nothing else, and they see, they're moving in that direction because they feel that the movement itself isn't speaking to them, or in some cases, talking down to them.
Wow. I sense what I'm talking about. These people. Look, one of the things that really, I'm going to answer it on two levels. One is when you mention defund the police, talk about giving your enemies ammunition, right? Because if Mo and Juan are at dinner and come outside and there's some people there hanging around who look threatening and are unsettling and begging and maybe even want to, start a confrontation. I mean, it's crazy. Downtowns can't prosper. Mo and Juan are upset and threatened. What if there's a confrontation? The police, it's a mess.
I mean, we're seeing it unfold in places like San Francisco, right?
Right. So you can't say to America here early in the 21st century, defund the police. Essentially what you're doing is playing into Trump's argument that you're nothing but a bunch of anarchists, that you are, what is he, Antifa? Remember that one? Antifa. You're Antifa. You are radicals. You are crazed. That you want to unsettle America, and you're threatening personally to many Americans. So he used that to try to undercut the power and the unifying power initially of Black Lives Matter. So to me, that is craziness. And you see that it then also invites the whole idea that you are just involved in identity politics, which is now, again, said to be a weight on the Democratic Party. But, I mean, how wild, and this goes to your question about young people. I think when people hear about identity politics from Trump, they forget, hey, wait a minute. What's the greatest identity politics in American history is that if you are a tall white male and you attended an expensive Ivy League school, oh, you're a winner. You just cashed in on the big lottery. They had every privilege and benefit. And if you were a minority, but especially a black person with a history of slavery and legal discrimination, you were out of it. So when people say, oh, let's try to do something about our past, all of a sudden it's identity politics. Identity politics is being born with a gold spoon in your mouth like Trump. That's identity politics in my mind. Anyway, when we think about the young people who didn't live through the first movement, but hear from the first movement, oh, we made so much progress on race in America. You wouldn't believe it. Dr. King is a hero. And we should understand that we didn't have our civil rights protected. We didn't have voting rights. They say, wait a second, I still hear arguments about voting rights. And they say, wait a second, the schools in my neighborhood suck. They're terrible. Poor black neighborhood, you try those schools. Look at the levels of achievement. I should say, look at the levels of failure. Look at the violence in the community. Look at the income inequality. I mean, I don't even have to make this case. You're familiar with it.
No, I'm familiar. I mean, what's remarkable, one of the things is that the school shootings that get the most attention are the ones that happen out in the suburbs. But when you look at the stats, people like to cite the stats. Look how many school shootings happened last year. The vast majority of them are happening in black majority or significantly black schools across America.
Because I feel like I'm talking to you, Mo, a friend and someone I've known for a long time, I'll say this. I am a black male. I live in Washington, D.C. It used to be called Chocolate City because it was a black majority city. Now I think it's on the line black-white. But who is more likely to kill me, Mo? Is it a white cop or is it a black kid with a gun? And the answer is it's the black kid with the gun who would be holding me up. And I say that as a black man. So that's part of, I think, why younger black people today say, wait a second, what is all this talk about progress and change and things are better? You know what? The schools, the job opportunities, the crime, I feel desperate. I may have to go out and hold up somebody, or I see all these homeless people. Is this really great? And maybe, and again, because you and I are involved in politics, they look at and say, oh, you guys were so excited about Barack Obama. You said the first black president. Well, what did he do? What difference did that make? I don't see that the schools got better. I don't see that the crime decreased. I don't see that there's jobs and opportunities for me. And I'm talking from my self-interest as the younger black male person. So I think, from my perspective, I'd love to engage that conversation. That's why I wrote New Prize for These Eyes, because just as you were asking me about, well, what's the agenda? I think those young people have to understand you've got to become politically engaged. You've got to be willing to compromise. You've got to understand gradual progress. Everything can't happen in a flash. But you know what? For a lot of them, they're just disenchanted and absolutely discouraged.
It's a larger Gen Z issue. And I think you can go back. You can go back to Occupy Wall Street. You can go back to a bunch of these movements, right? I mean, even what we saw most recently with the Israel-Gaza war. For a hot second, it becomes like, a flash. And it's like, it always feels like the same group where they were marching with BLM in 2020, 2021. They looked for a new cause. They don't see immediate change on it. They get immediately frustrated. They don't want to work within the system. But I want to go back because you mentioned Obama. Okay. And you mark the beginning of this second civil rights movement. You take us back to that speech in Boston, the Democratic National Convention, where a young Barack Obama, who most of us had never heard of at that time, gives this what would become iconic speech that becomes the launching pad to him becoming president 4 years later, sort of ahead of the game, right? The Hillary Clinton folks were frustrated. People in the party were like, you didn't wait your turn. He's like, I'm not waiting my turn.
Right.
Talk to me about the impact, good and bad, that Barack Obama and his 8 years as president, as the first black president in America, had on this entire movement, given that we're now talking, I mean, remarkably, almost 10 years since he left office.
Isn't that something? I'm getting old. I don't know about you. You're looking good, but I'm getting old, dude.
You're looking great, Juan.
Again, because we're both in politics, you might appreciate this, that I am in the arena. Barack Obama is introduced to the audience. Dick Durbin, still in the Senate, introduces him to this.
I'm a former Dick Durbin intern. I grew up outside Chicago.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Okay, look, I'm learning something about...
Under Press Secretary Robert Gibbs, who would go to work for Senator Obama, and fast forward. There's an alternate history one where I don't work at Fox News, but I'm somehow working in the Obama White House. But
different dimension.
Lo and behold, that we know how history turned out. But so you're in the arena in Boston.
Yeah. So there's like noise. It's like a nobody's coming on stage. It's not like a major political figure is about to speak.
He's a state senator running for.
He's a state senator. People are saying he's an up and comer. Who basically the question is, and it was actually in a headline, who is this guy? Right. And I won't go into quite the reasoning, the rationalization made by the Kerry campaign for having him there, but they were trying to reach out to Black Americans, the bottom line. So they choose this guy, and, they had an uncomfortable relationship with Jesse Jackson, and they thought, well, we'll give this guy a primetime spot. And he comes out, and here's what happens, Mo. He says, and I don't even have to say it, you, the audience listening today to this podcast, they all know it. We are not a white America. We are not a Black America. We're not a Hispanic America. We're not an Asian America. We're the United States of America. And by now, the audience is quiet and focused. And they hear him say something they haven't heard from Black leadership, and certainly not Black political leadership, certainly not the Jesse Jacksons of the world. My story could not have happened in any other country in the world. America is the one place where the child of an African immigrant and a white mother from Kansas could rise to this moment.
Unifying, reaching out to all colors.
This was an optimistic, positive, new horizons in terms of racial discussion and debate. New avenues are open for people coming together across racial lines. And suddenly, it's not only that Barack Obama becomes a star in that instant, it's that suddenly people are talking about a post-racial America, that there is now going to be a new day in American racial conversation and life. And of course, he rides this to the presidency. I'm always reminding people that his campaign poster, again, I don't have to remind you, it was a picture of him and the big type said HOPE, hope. It was positive. There were rainbows around him. It was like, oh my God, there's a Christ-like figure come to take us away from all the hostility, the bitterness of our racial past and lead us to a new day, to a promised land. I mean, I'm talking, Mo, like this was a sensation, like a rock star.
I mean, for those, I guess you millennial and up remember this. Gen Zers might not remember this, but I mean, literally that poster, that Shepard Fairey poster of Obama. I mean, people had like this poster of Obama, like a piece of artwork in their apartment.
Yes. To this moment.
Right.
So this is what I'm saying. It opened this new door. So all of a sudden he's elected. And, I remember Ebony Magazine had on the cover the words, in our lifetime, because it was unbelievable. There's a Black president. Are you kidding me? Right. But immediately he gets into real politics. He's a financial bailout after the financial crisis.
Right. I mean, he comes in at a very challenging time. Right. We thought the whole global financial system was going to collapse as he becomes president. Right.
So he then has to rescue the big banks, Wall Street, basically.
Auto industry.
And when he does that, a lot of people say, well, what about Main Street? What about the little guy? And Black America's like, hey, did this new first Black president do something for Black? Well, no, it's actually, he was helping out the big, okay. So you start to see a little disquiet. And then his major legislative initiative is the Affordable Care Act, known then as Obamacare. And the opposition forms Tea Party-like opposition that says, oh, wait a second. The Black president wants to tear apart my healthcare system, wants to make it harder for me to afford healthcare because he's going to use the social safety net and my tax dollars to reward these ne'er-do-wells, the working poor, the lower middle class in America. Oh, aren't they disproportionately the Latinos and the Blacks? Oh, I guess he is the Black president. He says he's the president of all the people of the United States. But I see him now as the Black president. And suddenly now you start to see the backlash, the opposition to this Black president. All this talk of post-racial America is starting to get a little fuzzy. And here comes Donald Trump, who says, I don't even think he was born in the United States. I don't think he's an American. There's a birther movement.
On the network we both worked at, a guy named Donald Trump was doing a weekly phone call to Fox and Friends, working through with some of the philosophy here in the opposition. But, it's interesting, Juan, you describe basically the Black community who says he's not doing enough for us. Right. And Republicans and a lot of whites in America who are like, oh, he's only doing stuff for them.
That's why, so this is interesting. I appreciate very much that you bring this up, because I write in the book that he's the most misunderstood president. Why? Because I think people, one, are reluctant ever to have discussions about race because it can be prickly and, say, oh, if you say the wrong thing, all that. And they say, oh, political correct. It just goes down the hole. But the fact is that race plays an important part in the Obama presidency. And people, of course, talk about, the introduction, the advent of a post-racial America, the thought of it and what it could be. But then,
right, Obama's supposed to be the cure for all of this, right?
Yes, but immediately he is not just the president of the United States. He's the Black president, or he's not the white president. It's an important element in understanding what I think is the most misunderstood president.
I mean, you talk about his dilemma and the dilemma of his advisors. And I remember, we all covered this, right? That they were trying to navigate both Michelle Obama as the first Black first lady, right? And Barack Obama as the first Black president. Like, I still want to be the president for everybody. How do I navigate Ferguson? How do I navigate these shootings? You go into it in the book, where they are trying to be very careful. He's trying to walk this tightrope as the Black president, but not be seen by the majority of America as the Black president, but then also not upset the Black community. I mean, looking back at it now, and I don't know if you talked to his advisors, et cetera, what is their sense of whether they got something, what they got right and what they got wrong, and sort of where we find ourselves today? What's the Obama legacy on all of this?
The book opens up actually by saying Ferguson is burning. And this is after the Michael Brown shooting. And there was rioting that broke out. And at the White House, there is this unprecedented question. Should the president go to Ferguson? Unprecedented, obviously, they'd never been a non-white president. And to send a president to a race riot, well, this is the first Black president. Maybe he can get in there and he can unify, heal, stop the violence, all that. So they're trying to deal with that. Okay, that's an example of what you're talking about, Mo. But there are two other prime examples that come to my mind. Thanks for the question. Obviously, you read the book. Thank you.
I always do.
Oh, you actually, always do? Okay,
I always read the book, and I'll tell you one thing. After Fox, I eventually end up at CBS, launched the morning show with my good friend Gayle King. And I will give her credit because there's so many TV hosts that just kind of, hey, Mosh, producer, can you read the book for me and come up with some good questions? Gayle, to her credit, reads every single book, has like Post-it notes, goes good. Before the author appears on the show, she'll go through the book with them, questions she had about the book. So I always very much respect folks who actually go and read the book. So I wanted to make sure to read it.
Well, I respect the idea that you took the time and offer a sincere thank you. The two other examples that you can find in the book are, one, after Trayvon Martin is killed, as we discussed earlier, Obama makes a simple statement. He says, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon. And there's an immediate reaction like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be the president of all the people. You don't call yourself post-racial. You say, I'm just the president. But hey, all of a sudden, you're now sympathizing with this black teen. Why are you involved in this conversation? Number two, after Henry Louis Gates, the Harvard professor, gets into a confrontation with a Cambridge, Massachusetts cop. He's come home from a trip. He doesn't have his keys, trying to get in. The neighbors call the police, says a man trying to get in the house. And he explains, and there's some confrontation, and the police arrest him. Obama says, that's stupid. Why would you arrest a man trying to get into his own home? And immediately, there's a backlash. Oh, the black president, Obama, took the side of the black guy over the white cop and called the cop stupid. And, then they have the Rose Garden bear meeting or whatever.
Right, like a beer summit where he invites the cop and the professor.
Yeah. But again, what happens after this? I think you'll appreciate it, Mo. His approval numbers with white America never again reached 50%. It had an immediate drag on his approval and his standing in white America. Again, how do you understand his presidency without dealing with this immense racial component?
So looking back at it, because it feels at times, I mean, if you look at media coverage, and I think this speaks to just the state of the media, but like mentions of racism skyrocket, right? Since 2016. And the feeling people have, especially in light of BLM and George Floyd, which began as protests, and obviously some of that turned into riots, right? There was violence and looting, etc.
Let me stop you and say this is a huge issue in the MAGA world. Make America Great Again, Trump world. In fact, when you look at the statistics, it's 90+% of these marches were peaceful marches. But anytime there's an incidence of violence or looting or anything, as Trump threatened, he said, these are radical, crazy people marching in the street. He tried to undercut the power of the movement. And he said famously, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, right? Which is a take back to the
throwback
first
to the 60s.
Yes. And again, he was playing on the idea that these are threatening, angry black faces. This definitely wasn't post-racial America.
But I mean, the images many people remember are what happened in Minneapolis, right? And a police station on fire. And so I only bring all that up to again kind of query kind of the thoughts that you have on this, which is Obama's legacy here. Are we better? Like, how much better is the country for the 8 years we had Barack Obama as president, as the first black president? Or in some cases, are we more divided? In some case, is there more concern about race now, despite the fact, Obama came in trying to be the unifier, et cetera. Where is America in 2025 in retrospect, and looking back at the fact that Obama had 8 years in office?
Well, I don't think there's any way that we can be honest here, from a historical perspective and say that was phenomenal. I mean, that's really unprecedented. And I think it was unanticipated. And we've had a black president before we've had a woman president. And he not only won the presidency, he won it twice. And so you'd have to say that was amazing, right? Okay, so from a historical framework, you'd say fantastic, right? Okay, but that historical frame then takes us into modern reality, which is, he leads to Donald Trump, right? And Donald Trump is a guy that was, as we discussed earlier, involved with the birther movement. Your audience is going to get bored if I start to go back to Central Park 5. But how about I come forward and, he's telling people that, black immigrants from Haiti are eating pets, white people's pets in Ohio. He doesn't stop. I mean, it just goes on with this guy with this kind of always appeal to racial division because it is of utility to him. And I think in part because there are people who still were discomforted, might be a nice way to put it, maybe didn't like the idea that there was a black president and were uncomfortable with the idea that maybe he's doing more for the black man than he is for the white man or everyone, right? So that's part of it. And of course, the backlash, as I said, leads to the Trump presidency. But even Obama's vice president, Biden, who beat Trump once, then loses in terms of Kamala Harris, Biden's vice president, the first black woman as vice president, loses to Trump again. We keep coming back to this racial lens. And so to me, it's a little bit like people say, okay, what difference did it make Obama, Harris, da-da-da? Hey, we're involved with a second movement here, folks. I mean, it's not Dr. King's movement. This is a very different movement in an early 21st century, internet dominant, social media dominant in a way that it's never been. And you gotta see it for what it is and understand you're involved right now as Trump is trying to deconstruct all these affirmative action, DEI programs, as he's saying, cops who committed crimes, according to juries, in terms of their handling of poor black people or black kids on the street. We're pardoning them. They get out. The gang that ran through the Capitol with the Confederate flag on January 6th, pardon them. They get out. There's a mess.
A line is drawn there where it's like, forget J6. What about Minneapolis? What about the people who, broke the windows, and storefronts and looted, et cetera? Juan, I'm curious for your take on this. Numbers came out. Financial Times ran this chart right around the election, and it was a survey of Americans, and they split up Latinos, Black Americans, and white progressives.
Right.
And it was you might be familiar with this. They asked questions like, how much racism is there in society? And they found that white progressives believe there is more racism than Black Americans. They found the phrase, if you work hard, you can make it, that more Black and Latino Americans agreed, with that, than white progressives who are like, no, you can't work and make it in this country. They asked the question, is America the greatest country in the world? And more Black Americans and Latino Americans agreed with that phrase than white progressives.
Correct.
And when we talk about the movement here, obviously it's not, there's a variety of folks, right? White, Black, brown, et cetera, as part of the civil rights movement. I'm curious as to your take, your perspective as you wrote this book, the thought you gave to the sort of white progressives who are involved in this movement, the role that they play, especially in light of sort of those views that they believe there's more racism than the average Black person in America.
So here's the thing about that poll, which I found fascinating, but I think it reflects the reality that I'm talking about in this book, that in the past, you had a conversation in terms of race relations in the United States that was between Black and white. And remember, in the first movement, you're talking about 1950s, 1960s America, mid-20th century. America is close to 90% white, 10% Black. The Latino population is minuscule. Immigration is at a low ebb. I mean, really, you have an Immigration Reform Act in 65 that begins to change that and allow people from pretty much the Southern Hemisphere to essentially start coming.
That really begins in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a different world. You talk about second movement, first movement. Remember, first movement, there's a Black-white conversation about race. And what is it about, Moshe? It's about things like, can I sit in the front of the bus? And what about this history of slavery and and awful things like lynching? And
I'm not allowed to vote.
Yeah, right. And so it's largely like from the white John Bircher perspective, it's, these people are pushing out of their lane. They don't know their place is another way to put it. And it's a guilt trip because of what happened in the past. And that's the conversation. Okay, fast forward to what you're talking about with the poll. I think you said it was a Financial Times poll.
It was a Financial Times analysis of polling that found that white progressives were far to the left of everybody else.
Okay, so now we come forward to a conversation in an America that is not 90% white, but closer to 60% white. So you see a declining white population. The Black population has grown somewhat from about 10% to 13%, but they're no longer the number one minority in the country. The number one minority is Latino.
Right, about 20%.
And the fastest growing minority in the country is Asian. this is and of course, the economy is not necessarily focused on the U.S. economy. It's a global economy in so many ways. Okay, so this changes the conversation. Now you have different participants in this conversation about race. And this is so critical. The progressive white population becomes aligned with people who are educated. And we've seen this in the recent election where whites with college degrees, whites who've gone to college, voted for the Democrats, Kamala Harris. Whites without college education voted for Donald Trump. Working class whites overwhelmingly. In fact, Harris thought that she might have a chance with white women given the abortion issue and the power of that issue after the Supreme Court undid abortion as a constitutional right. But guess what? White women went to Trump. Okay, so the conversation then with the white progressives becomes one in which I think there still is some element of, I'm not black, they say to themselves. I understand the discrimination. I understand that past very difficult history. And you know what? There are people who don't want to talk about it, but I am going to sort of bear the cross. I'm going to take that woolen shirt on myself and say, it's hard to be black in America, and I can acknowledge that much. And I think they come from that perspective, if you will, Mo. Whereas black people, and like me, I think, my dad standing on a street corner, I grew up in New York. My dad standing on a street corner in New York in, let's say, 1960, if you said to him, you could be a national correspondent for the Washington Post. You could be on national TV doing Fox News every day. You could be the author of books published by Simon and Schuster. He'd say, what? A black guy? Well, maybe, no, I can't. He said, if you think Dr. King, James Baldwin, no. Juan Williams exists in 2025, and that's me. And you say, wow, to my dad, that would be like beyond belief, right? He'd be like, holy smokes, what? Yeah, okay. And I take, so from my perspective, as opposed to the white progressive perspective, where the white progressives are taking on the hair shirt and saying, yeah, okay, it's hard to be black in America.
Right, buying anti-racist baby and all the, all the stuff that came out of George Floyd.
Yes. Yeah. So, but from the black perspective, I think in all honesty, there's yes, we've made progress, especially older black people, older people of color. We talked about younger black people having a unique perspective, but they are also more progressive in terms of saying, I believe that you can have opportunity and success in America. And for me, I say, yes, I think you can have opportunity and success. Yes, there's systemic racism. Yes, there's mass incarceration. Yes, there's an ongoing issue about the relationship with the police, income inequality. But I think especially for younger people, they're like, well, guess what? I see Oprah Winfrey. I see some of these huge rap stars, Jay-Z and the like.
Jay-Z's a billionaire. Beyonce's a billionaire, right?
All right. I see Juan Soto out there playing baseball. He's just about a billionaire. Mm-hmm. So they're like, well, and by the way, how silly, because these people are like beyond exceptions. They're exceptions to the exception, if you want to get that. But anyway, yes, I think that's why you see this divide with progressive whites especially, still wearing the hair shirt. And you see sometimes in Black America, maybe because you want to push back on the darkness and the reality of the difficulty of being not white in America, that, Black people say, you know what, things have changed, things are better. But again, it's older blacks, I think, more so.
It also seems like, especially with younger Black population, that part of the response to Trump was the optimistic message that you can't, that there is something to, saying you can work hard and achieve things that the liberals don't get, that they get from the Democrats, like systemic racism, everything's broken, we need to fix things for you, that there's this, idea or the feeling of a patronizing message. And I'm curious, Juan, especially coming out of 2024 and the election and Kamala Harris's defeat in sort of this navel gazing post-mortem that Democrats are doing. What don't Democrats get about the second civil rights movement and about the state of Black America? What are they missing, especially as you sort of see, again, this trickling to the right?
Well, this is interesting because I think, in my mind, I wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post. Is basically an excerpt of the book, but it goes into things that are not in the book, like what happened to the Democrats with the black vote in 2024.
Right. I mean, you had the Obamas out there. I mean, they were freaking out in the fall. Like, where are the black voters for the woman who could be the first black female president?
And Obama made news there, going back to what our earlier discussion about Obama. He makes news there by saying he thinks that a lot of black men are misogynistic.
Right. It was a lecture from the Obamas.
Well, that was what they said, and people said who were critical of him.
Yeah.
But to me, in my thinking, and in the piece that I wrote for the Post, I said, Mo, that I think that Kamala Harris didn't pick up on the energy, the momentum that attaches to a second civil rights movement. She portrayed herself as a stable force as compared to this wild man. I think they eventually called him a fascist and, a bad guy. And she's like the stable, normalizing force that says we can go forward and says, oh yeah, Black America has been through these trenches and I am here to continue to help you, like Joe Biden did. And, Joe Biden named a black woman to the Supreme Court. Joe Biden has the black Secretary of Defense, the first one in the history, first black woman on the Supreme Court in history. Joe Biden has been fighting the Republicans on voter suppression and all this. He tried on police reform, but was stopped by the Republican. And to my mind, a lot of this then comes across as, stable. Forward-looking, no. Forward-looking like, what's the energy here? Why aren't you the disruptor? Why aren't you the change agent? Why aren't you saying, here's what we can do for you?
At a time where the polling showed that 3/4 of Americans wanted major change to the system.
Correct. And I think that includes minorities. What do you say, 2/3?
3/4, according to the exit polls. Yeah.
Right. So huge. People want change. And I think in terms of civil rights, you think about why we honor civil rights, I guess ethos, vibe, karma, is the way to think of it. It's because it's clearly that people want to get on board change and progress and the new day. And Kamala Harris was basically saying, hey, today's pretty good. Let's stick with it because this other guy's a threat. Well, ultimately, a lot of people said, even with the race issue that is like a cloud around Trump, no, if he's going to bring change or something different, maybe I'll get on board with that. And to me, that's why the Democrats did not do well. I think they didn't pick up on the energy of being proponents of change, a positive vision. Trump is out there offering a positive vision of grievance. And, remember the first time it was American carnage, but now he's saying, oh, you've been taken advantage of. The elites have done this. The establishment's done this. Biden's done that. And everybody's like, oh, and we haven't discussed it, Mo, but what was the most powerful ad? Oh, yeah, the Democrats are with transgender people.
I'm for you. They are for them. They, them.
And they're in jail. They're illegal immigrants in jail, and our tax dollars are going to them.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm going to stop it, says Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, you had that Kamala Harris. She was pushed to the left by ACLU and some of these groups and said, I support trans surgery for prisoners.
But of course, I mean, there's lots in there. I mean, she said that when she was Attorney General of California, and the federal government, even under Donald Trump's first term, had as the law that if someone was in need of surgery of that type and in prison, you had to give it to them.
It's a nuance that's lost in traditional political campaigns, right?
Yeah. What do they say? If you're explaining, you're losing.
Well, go back to '04. If I voted for it before I voted against it, right?
Exactly. It's not a winning
John
game.
Kerry. No, that's not a winning message. But I'm curious now. I mean, we speak here. We're literally not even a week into Donald Trump 2. He's made a lot of moves very quickly related to DEI and other matters. And I wonder, having watched the last few decades here, watched the Obama era, watched the first Trump era, we don't see a resistance, at least not yet, that existed in 2017 to Trump. What is the sense you get of the impact of these moves? Did DEI go too far as some are concerned, or is there an overreach from the Trump side? What's your sense of what we've been seeing unfold here in the first few days and the potential impact of all of that?
Well, on DEI, it's clear that he thinks that there is a pot of gold in that mine. In other words, he's going to feed that to his base, to his MAGA base, and say that, you know what, you have been discriminated against by all these policies that are under the DEI banner because, you know what, excellence is being retarded because they say the job should go to a Black, a Latino, a woman.
Right. It's not about equity. It's not about equality anymore. It's about equity. They're pushing an agenda.
It's not about excellence, is my thinking. It's that people who are hardworking, who are doing everything right, who are getting the A's, can't get their kids into Harvard, right? Because they want to have a certain number of Blacks and Latinos. Or even, the argument from the conservatives is even that the Asians are discriminated against because the Asians have so many high grades, right?
I was going to say the lawsuits that eventually lead to the Supreme Court ruling a couple of years ago overturning affirmative action were partially filed there by Asian students who said they were discriminated against at Harvard. Being
used, I think, by the far right for their goal, which was to say they don't like affirmative action. So what you see here is they're trying to stop. This is what I think Trump is doing right now. He is feeding that flame right now and saying racial division actually is politically expedient for him, that it boosts him with his base, with the MAGA base. But you, Mo, asked me something that was a little more. You said, how do I think the American public is responding to this? And I still am of a mind that most Americans think, you know what, we did go through some harsh times and we still do understand that. Would you want your child to be born Black in America or white? And you think, well, I love all people. I'm a good guy. But white kids do have an advantage. And if you think about generational wealth, if you think about generational opportunity, much more likely for the white child than the Black child. Yes, we have Michael.
As far as you're concerned, there's still not a level playing field here in America.
Right. And I think we all know it instinctively. We all know it as a matter of heart that there's a difference there. And that's why I think most Americans, without, lumping people on the basis of race, are thinking, well, wait a second, you can't just pretend like race doesn't exist and you can't talk about it. I mean, where this really the rubber hits the road with this one is there are people who say we shouldn't teach the history of slavery, discrimination, things like
right. We need to the people who still advocate for the Civil War being a states' rights war, right?
But here's the reason: it makes the white kids feel bad. They're not proud of America when they hear about this.
But the pushback I think that they would have gotten is that in the last few years, explicitly white kids were made to feel bad, starting in like kids who are 7 years old who have nothing to do with this history are being made in especially in certain private schools, etc., to feel bad.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think all of us, I'm no child, but if I was in the class and you're talking about people being strung up from trees because they were walking on the wrong side of the street or told not to use the white bathroom, I mean, it makes you feel bad. What's the alternative? The alternative is, oh, we'll make the kid ignorant of American history.
The pendulum. I think the issue that especially when it comes to education, which is why you've seen some of the pushback. What was the project out of the New York Times? Was it 1617 project?
Yeah, something like that.
That ultimately you go from this just extreme swing of like. We're now going to teach you that America is a bad place and has always been a bad place, right? Or at least that's the feeling, right? That's the critique of it. And then it swings to, no, America is a perfect place. And we're not going to tell you anything nasty that's ever happened here in America. And as we know, as people who appreciate history and journalists, is like the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right?
It is. And of course, with the 1619 project.
1619, yes.
The historians had lots of arguments with it. And critiques of it, that America was formed really in terms of rebellion against the British. It wasn't just about slavery, but it's part of the story. And I think for lots of people, the idea that America had a civil war, and the war that took most American lives to this day, and that it was on American soil. Some people say, oh, that was about Northern aggression against Southern states. It was about economic issues. Wait a minute. Do you think slavery was involved, Mo? I think it was. I think slavery was on the table there. But they don't want to say it.
Right.
And it's
right.
like
States' rights. The right of a state to do what? Right.
Right. Or it's like this recent argument about monuments and the naming of the military installations. And people are like, well, it's just tradition. It's just heritage. That's just part of what they're saying, oh, we're going to celebrate this history. And when people say, but why are we celebrating the idea that a guy who fought to break apart the Union and a guy who fought in defense of enslaving human beings should be celebrated? Say, oh, you are just a kill. You're not a fun guy. You're a bad guy. You want to deny us our heritage. Well, again, to me, you've got to have honest discussions about this. A moment ago, we had honest discussions about feeling threatened on the street or who's most likely to kill me and et cetera. You should have to me, the way forward for us as Americans on race is about sitting down with Mo for an honest discussion and saying, okay, defund the police is full of crap. That's nonsense. That doesn't make sense. And when we teach our kids, it's not about saying, oh, the kid feels bad to be an American. I think the kid should be proud to be an American. I'm proud to be an American, but I'm proud to be an American knowing with full sight what it means to be an American, where we came from and who we are, so that I have a sense of where we're going.
It's a complicated thing. I think a lot of societies deal with this. Notably, I was always found remarkable how Germany has tried to deal with its World War II history.
Right.
You literally walk through central Berlin, like the equivalent of the Times Square area, right? Or the National Mall area of Berlin. And you have a monument to the murdered Jews of Europe.
Yeah.
And so there's an acknowledgement. I mean, actually, if you walk the streets of Berlin, they actually have the names of various German Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. Literally, if you look down, or you're at the bus stop, you look down, you see a name with the year they were killed. And so that's like one extreme version of a society dealing with the ills of its past.
Right.
It'd be, sort of the same thing if we did a monument to the Native Americans in the middle of the national. We have a museum, but not the way the Germans deal with it. And so It's these fascinating conversations, and as Americans, as a relatively young nation, comparatively to some of these countries, how we deal with it. The Japanese have their own challenges. The Chinese have their own challenges with their societies, et cetera. What you get at in this book here speaks to sort of the core issues in American society, the American soul here. And so curious, having written this now, where are we at with the second civil rights movement? Are there certain things you're like, it has achieved X, Y, and Z, and it still has to achieve this next thing? Where are we at, and sort of what do the folks involved in it tell you?
Part of the problem is, I think that right now, a lot of the progressive movement, black, white, people of all colors, are discouraged and feel like they've been beaten at the polls, right? Trump is in the White House and he's taking apart DEI, previously called affirmative action. He's being very clear about indifference to, the January 6th rioters, but, I'm going after what he calls violence in the cities. And of course, he's talking about minority populations. He's still saying that January 6th is okay because the election was stolen from him in 2020 based on what? Voter fraud in black areas and minority large cities. I mean, this goes on. So right now, people on the progressive side, the Democrats, they're like lost. They're at SEMO, and they're trying to figure out how they get back on track. And to me, back on track means that they're going to have to be willing to talk to not only themselves, and I think this is where they got lost. They were like making excuses for bad behavior. We talked about the corruption, the money flowing into Black Lives Matter, just sort of disappearing. But also they got lost in terms of, defund the police. What a loser. Forget it, all right? They get lost in terms of, being excessive in terms of demands and the like. And I think that if you understand the racial division in our politics, the Republican Party is an 80% plus white party. I mean, that's just a fact. And Democrats, 80+% of Trump's vote came from whites.
Right. But they would argue that they also achieved the most significant numbers when it came to non-whites that they've seen in decades.
Unbelievable, in fact. It's still the case that 80% of blacks voted for Harris, but yes, you're right. So when you look at this, the key issue here for me is talking to the Trump base as well as to the swing voter in the swing states and saying, you supported Black Lives Matter because you're a good person who supports justice, equality of opportunity, justice under law for all. And guess what? Right now, it looks like we are loading up on the wrong side of that history and that emotion, that sentiment of let's create an equal playing field in America. So if you make that case, you've got to make the case in terms of vote for people who believe in equality. They're not out to punish you. If, you're a white working class person in America, nobody's trying to take your job. Nobody's trying to take your tax dollars and give it to somebody else unfair. No, we're saying we are America. This goes back to the Obama theme. We're the United States of America. We're in a greater demographic mix than we've ever seen. And for us to remain a powerful, harmonious state, we've got to figure out this race relations thing. And that's why I think right now, the progressives, especially those who've been disdainful of politics and dismissive of politicians, they're going to have to get involved in politics seriously and say, Kamala Harris, she was a status quo person, but we think she's a good person. And here, Joe Biden didn't make this happen, didn't make that happen. But really, what we are now is about a positive, progressive vision of what America can be. And we're speaking to all of you, whether you voted for Trump, voted against Trump. Here are real ideas for moving America forward, not just on race, but on economic equality, on economic opportunity. We want to reward excellence and valor too. We believe in our military. They got to get a positive, energized message for what they stand for.
Are there any individuals that you're looking at, sort of the up and comers? Now that, I feel like this election, especially since how it ended up, I don't know that Obama is still the face of this movement anymore. They need to be looking to a new generation.
Remember, Obama's a politician, right? We'd agree on that.
Yeah.
He's not a civil rights activist. I don't think he's ever claimed to be that.
No.
He says he's not post-racial. He's not a civil rights. He's a politician.
Yeah.
People talk about what comes out in the book, and the book tells this story, and you come to Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor in Georgia, but has been leading significant efforts against voter suppression so that people see her as a real stalwart, a real hero in many cases. They say, is it possible? I don't know. Maybe she continues to grow in that way in a national.
Though there's been some pushback on her. I mean, she has her own election denial thing, right?
That's what people say. Remember that? Yeah. Why did she never acknowledge?
She never acknowledged the victory.
Right. So, okay. But anyway, she remains a powerful force there. And you look around right now and you look at various organizations, and some of them you wouldn't even know the names, but like Color of Change, what they have been doing is they've been pushing on a lot of the corporations to do a better job in terms of not only hiring, but contracting, getting out. But what are those small organizations that speak to issues that sometimes are not racial, but speak to maybe an abortion issue, an immigration issue, speak to better schools and what we're doing with schools for kids who are poor and minority, instead of letting them, I don't know, suffer in these inferior schools. I think there's hope there, but I don't see, if you're saying to me, is there a new Dr. King on the horizon? It's hard to see that right now.
Juan Williams, thank you for this conversation. Thanks for being so candid, so open. And the book, again, is New Prize for These Eyes. Congrats.
Well, wow. Thanks for a fabulous interview. I sincerely want you to know that, man.
Thanks, Juan.